We're just hanging out, and this is a book. There's some passages before over the years, and it's amazing when you have, I guess, the real history, or who's to say this was real back then, but it's closer to the source. And like phone tag, the further you go down the line, the more influence can be had, and also it's like diluting. It's like, or picture like a hybrid. Let's say the truth is the truth. Well, let's say you want to start lying about it. In the beginning, like you can't lie 100% because the people won't accept that. So maybe you dilute it a little bit. And then 1, 5, 10, 20 years, you get 100 years down the line, you could be completely off course. So we got real history from the 1600s to the 1800s of New York, and we'll discuss Long Island and some really interesting things. And I'm sorry I cut off the live before, but this is something that I wanted to go back into the history. And just reading from a book that's over 200 years old, I enjoy the reading. And so if you're looking just to hang out and enjoy the knowledge that's putting out there, it's almost like a lot of guys listen to this as they're driving in their jobs or commuting. And it is what it is. I'm going to briefly just go over a few things here. First, we're going to talk about the outline history of the state of New York. How you doing? Now, this is also, how do you say it, undiluted. The way they talk back then and the words they might use, it might offend some people. So it is what it is. But this is a real history book, printed in the 1800s. So it is what it is. The state of New York. The discovery of New York. It says the Indians of the Five Nations. In 1524, John de Verrazano, a Florentine native, and a Florentine navigator in the service of France, made a voyage to North America coast and believed to be account which he gave and entered the harbor of New York. No colonies were planted and no results followed. Now, here's the thing, if no colonies were planted by him, he went to New York. New York already existed back then, though. Is all of our history. I don't know. Well, let's get to it. It says, though discoveries were made by the French, north from this point in the colonies planted by the English farther to the south, it is not known that New York was again visited by Europeans in 1609, when the Dutch East India Company sent Hendrik Hudson of the Englishman by birth, on a voyage discovery on a vessel called the Half Moon. He reached the coast of Maine, sailed thence to the Cape Cod, and southwesternly to the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. Then, coasting northward, he entered Delaware Bay on the 28th of August. From thence he proceeded northward to the 3rd of September 1609, anchored in New York Bay. On the 12th he entered the river that bears his name. He proceeded slowly up to a point. Imagine going somewhere and you're like, now this is my river. This is the Hudson. It is what it is. Now this is it. There you go. He sent the boat's crew up to explore further up, and they passed above Albany. September 23rd, he set sail downriver and immediately returned to Europe. In 1607, Samuel Champlain, a French navigator, sailed up the St. Lawrence, explored its tributaries, and on the 4th of July that year, discovered the lake which bears his name. Wow, imagine just going everywhere and saying, this is my lake, this is my river. At the time of the discovery of New York remember, this is an old book. Don't get offended at me. At the time of the discovery of New York by the whites, That's what it says. This is written in the 1800s. At the time of the discovery of New York by the whites, the southern eastern portion was inhabited by the Mohican or Mohegan Indians, while the portion west of the Hudson was occupied by the five Confederate tribes, afterwards named by the English the Five Nations, and the French, the Iroquois, and by themselves called the Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee. That's kind of like if you go on a Saturday night and you get a whole lot of punani, but it's Haudenosaunee. People of the Longhouse. The Longhouse, wow. I would probably belong to the Longhouse. This is history. The Longhouse, formed by this confederacy, extended east and west through the state, having its eastern portal the Mohawks and its western Senecas, while between dwelt the Oneidas, and the Cayugas, and after 1714, a sixth nation, the Tursorocas, southeast of Oneida Lake. Of the Indian, Parkman says the commencement of the 17th century in the region now forming the state of New York, power was rising to a ferocious vitality, which, but for the presence of Europeans, which would probably been subjected, absorbed, or exterminated every other Indian community of the Mississippi. So there was a lot of interfighting within the Indian tribes. Quite interesting. But there was interfighting from Mississippi to north of Ohio. Imagine doing all that fighting with a bow and arrow. Like, holy shit. Tough people. The Iroquois was, it says right here, the Iroquois was the Indian of Indians. I never knew that. Now, this book is from the 1800s. I didn't write it. I'm simply reading an historical account. Okay, I'm not saying this. This is what the book says. It says the Iroquois was the Indian of Indians. A thorough savage, yet a finished and developed savage he is, perhaps an example of the highest elevation which a man can reach without emerging from his primitive condition of a hunter. Once again, none of these words are my opinion, or this is an historical book. We're on the first page. Can you understand why, like, you didn't learn this in history class? A geographical position commanding on one hand the portal of the Great Lakes and on the other source of the streams flowing both the Atlantic and the Mississippi gave ambitious and aggressive Confederates advantages which they perfectly understood, and they profited to the utmost. Patient and politic as they were ferocious, they were not only conquerors of their own race, but they were powerful allies and dreaded foes of the French and English colonies. Flattered and caressed by both, yet too sagacious and to give themselves the reserve to either. Their organization and history evince their intrinsic superiority. Even the traditionary lore, amid its pluralities, show a time stamp of energy and force of striking contrast with the flimsy creations of the Algonquin fancy. That the Iroquois, left under their own institutions, would have developed a civilization of their own, I do not believe. I mean, that's page 1. Wow. So, well, what do I want to get into? Now we're going to get into the Dutch. Do you want to know how much they bought New York for? How much they bought Manhattan for? Let's get to the best deal in the history of the world. Now, here's the thing, too. Whenever they bought land from the Native Americans, the money went to the chief. Every time, the chief got the money in a hat. They always got a hat. Let's get to the hat. New York under the Dutch. Okay? Dutch-English governors, a combination. In 1610, another vessel was sent from Holland and trade the natives in 1612. 2 more soon to follow. And a small fort and a few rude buildings, I don't know what a rude building is, were erected at the southern extremity of Manhattan Island, and the place was named New Amsterdam. In 1614, the States General of Holland granted a charter to the merchants engaged in the expeditions, giving exclusive privileges. of trade for 4 years. The Hudson River has ascended from Hendrik Christensen, and a fort and trading house erected near the present site of Albany, which is named Fort Orange. In 1621, the Dutch West India Company was chartered, and 1623, settlers were sent thither. 1626, Peter Minuit, a director general or governor of the province, either one, arrived with settlers and purchased the island of Manhattan for about $24 in Indian trinkets. Hold on. He purchased the island of Manhattan from the Indians for trinkets of value about $24. It was trinkets. Dude, they bought Manhattan for $24 in shenanigans. Dude, $24 of anything. They literally bought Manhattan for $24 in shenanigans. In 1629, the company offered grants to the patroons who found settlements in the province, and more than 50 adults, and several availed themselves of this offer. 1633, Minuit was recalled, and the Water von Twiller appointed to his place. During the administration, the controversy concerning jurisdiction was commenced between the Dutch and the English, who claimed the country around the. Okay, interesting. Wow. Well, that's a lot about the Dutch. I just wanted to cover that part. They bought Manhattan for $24 in trinkets. Trinkets. How did even did they have dollars? So like, it'd be like giving someone a pocket of sand. Yeah, $24 in sand. Thank you so much. There you go. There you go. Let's get to it. What else can we talk about? Here we go. In 1687, a war broke out between the Iroquois and the French. The country of the former was invaded by the French under De la Barre and M.D. Nonville. Successfully, in their retaliation, the Iroquois, 1,200 strong, fell upon the French on the south side of the island of Montreal. They burnt the houses, sacked their plantations, and put the sword to all men, women, and children without the skirts of the town. Without the skirts of the town. I don't understand. Did they take off their skirts? Or basically the outskirts. They killed everyone. 1687, the Iroquois, they killed everyone. All right. That was a reset. Okay. Here we go. A thousand French were slain in the invasion, and 26 were carried into captivity and burnt alive. Shortly afterward, another attack, a lower part of the town was destroyed, and all the assailants was lost only 3. That was a better battle. 1688, New York and the Jerseys, not called New Jersey, but called Jerseys, were annexed the jurisdiction to New England, and Sir Edmund Andros was made governor of all. Wow, interesting. Here we go, 1689, William and Mary ascended to the English throne. Sir Edmund Andros seized at Boston, and Jacob Leisler seized at the fort of New York under the pretense of holding it up for new sovereigns. During the 2 years, the Leislers' usurpation of the French and Indians made a descent on Schenectady, and on February 8th, 1690, and they massacred about 60 people. About 60 people. A lot of crazy shit. The danger by which they were threatened induced the people who were favorably disposed towards William and Mary opposed the Leisler to submit to authority at the time. Wow. 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 What a crazy time. Well, let's get to Long Island. All right? Well, we could talk about the war with France and the commitments of the revolution. Do we want to do that? Or we want to go straight to the state of New York? Well, let's talk about more people. Let's see, In March 1744, war was declared between France and England, and the colonies of New York and New England participated. During this continuance of the country north from Albany was frequently ravaged by parties of French and Indians, so upstate New York was getting decimated. Saratoga was burned. I imagine a whole city just getting burnt down over and over. Brutal, brutal. Saratoga was burned in 1744, and nearly all the inhabitants killed or made prisoners, and the village of Hoosick was taken. Wow, okay. In 1746, 2 years later, an unsuccessful expedition against Canada was undertaken, for which the colony of New York furnished 1,600 men. Peace was concluded at Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. A period of nominal tranquility followed, and the frontier was desolated by savage parties encouraged by the French. Wow. Well, so here we go. Through the influence of London merchants who colonial trade suffered by reason of an act, the odious law was repealed in 1766, but its repeal was followed by the declaration of Parliament of the right to tax the colonies in cases of whatsoever. That is what's been happening in this country for a long time. Look at the governor of New York. What was it? Congestion prices. Everything just keeps on rehappening. This is what the British were doing in 1766. A right to tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever. You mean like a sales tax? You mean like just fucking the people over and over and over and over again? Guys, nothing's changed. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, there are people that are fucking, and then there's the regular people that just are getting the fucking. It's just that simple. That's the history of the world. The fucked and the fucking. I don't know how else to say it. You're either the nail or the hammer. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. Okay. Here we go. All right. Let's get to it. The non-importation agreement continued so far related by tea, and the East Indian Company suffered severely in consequence. Doggedly determined to maintain the assumed right of taxation, the British government abolished the export duty on such tea was shipped to the colonies, thus enabling the colony to sell it there cheaper than England. It sounds like what's happening right now with taxes and tariffs and keep buying it here, making it here. Well, here you go. They said we can make our own tea here. Why are we going to buy it from you and pay tax? It is what it is. Here we go. Let's keep it going. In New York City, the arms in the arsenals, the muskets and cannons, were seized and distributed amongst the people, and a provisional government for the city was organized. Isn't that so funny how guns in government, or before that, swords and arrows, and before that, rocks and the slingshots, isn't that funny how they go hand in hand? The people were oppressed, and they're like, we're tired of getting fucked. So they stormed the arsenal of some lazy guard of the British, who was there just because he was getting paid, and the people weren't compliant. So they seized and distributed the weapons all throughout New York City. Imagine New York City, the people all getting muskets. They're like, listen, we're done. We're done with this tea tax. Get the fucking muskets. Ticonderoga was seized on the 10th of May, 1775, by the Connecticut Patriots. Before they were the New England Patriots, the Connecticut Patriots, under Colonel Ethan Allen, and 2 days later, Crown Point, without resistance, and thus command of Lake Champlain was secured. Interesting. Here we go. In August, an attack was made by the British ship of war named Asia on a party where they were engaged by removing some cannon from Battery of New York, and considerable damage was done to the buildings in the vicinity of the guns were removed. In autumn, an armament was collected by General Schuyler of Ticonderoga, and an expedition went against Canada. The forts in Champlain and St. John's and Montreal were taken. So you had a British ship, Asia, that was bombing via cannons into New York City. Just imagine the time. Imagine being in Battery Park in South Manhattan, and imagine a ship, the British ship, just cannon foddering Manhattan. I mean, we think the world's crazy now. Like every year or 2 years, I mean, you had the Canadian and the French burning down and pillaging and the R word of upstate New York. You had Long Island and Manhattan getting attacked by British ships. Imagine the hot dog guy getting killed by a cannon. You're down there, like in Battery Park. You're like, get your hot dogs here. Frat dogs here, have no fear. Best hot dogs here. Holy shit, just a cannonball, just dum dum dum, just and all the roads are straight down there. Just if you go up a street or up an avenue, that cannonball could go for a long time. Wowza. It is what it is. Here we go. The Revolutionary War and the events of the state of New York. In early 1776, General Lee, with a force of 1,200 men, occupied the city of New York. General Schuyler, with a small force, disarmed the Tories of the Mohawk Valley, and like service had been rendered on Long Island by New Jersey militia. About the 1st of July, General Howe and previously evacuated Boston and sailed Halifax, appeared off Sandy Hook with his army, and there he was soon joined by his brother Admiral Howe. Let's see here. On 22nd of August, the British force landed on Long Island, and the 27th, a battle was fought, resulting in the defeat of the Americans, who on the night of the 29th, favored by a thick fog, retreated to New York. The plan had formed to capture New York and ascend up the Hudson, effect a junction with the force of Canada under the General Carleton, and thus cut off communication between the Patriots. Blah, blah. Let me see here. All right. On 21st of April, 1777, a state constitution was adopted under George Clinton and was elected governor, and he assumed the duties of the office on the 31st of July. The principal object of the British campaign in 1777, imagine being elected to the governor of a state when you're not really a state yet, because the British are still coming back and fighting your state. They're like, no, wait, no, this is our colony. And then the people in the colony are like, no, we voted, we have a constitution, we have a state, and actually we have a governor. So you have the British like, no, we're your king, you're our colony, you're our subjects. And the people like, no, we had an election. Voting back then was a death sentence, because we read history now. Back then, they didn't know if they were going to beat the British. They were hoping, but you get what I'm saying. The British Empire was an empire back then. It's not like it's little floofy guys in tight pants like they are now, but it is what it is. Okay, let's keep it going. All right. Hmm. The year 1780, scene of most important hostile operations. The year 1780 was made memorable for the treason of Arnold. We all know about Arnold, Benedict Arnold. This was a gallant officer had in some irregularities in Philadelphia in 1778. He had been court-martialed and sentenced to reprimand by the commander-in-chief. He apparently acquiesced in the sentence, but his pride was deeply wounded and he thirsted for revenge. He solicited and obtained command of West Point and entered into negotiations by Sir Henry Clinton of the delivery of the fortress in the hands of the British. In course of the negotiations, Major Andre of the British Army met General Arnold at the banks of the Hudson. In attempting to return, he captured about 30 miles from New York by three militiamen named Paulding, Williams, and Van Wert, who refused his offered bribes and delivered him to the commander. He was tried, condemned, and executed as a spy. He went full circle. The Revolutionary War virtually closed the surrender by the Cornwallis and his army in Yorktown on the 19th of October, 1781. A treaty peace was entered in 3rd September, 1783. See, here's the thing, though, about how they wrote back then. We say 1781 or 1778. But if I could show you this, that's not a 1. Those are an I. And it's a very little I. Where the 17, like the numbers after the 1 are so much bigger. And that goes, people, I've seen conspiracy saying, that wasn't a 1. It was basically saying basically they've hit 1,000 years. They added 1,000 years. Basically, if you go to the timeline of before Christ and after Christ, that basically, if you had saying the year 1776, it really was only in the year of 776. So it was only 700. So basically, right now we'd only be 1,025 years after the death of Christ. Why would they do that? Why would they want to try to hide 1,000 years or make it seem like we're 2,000 years later? Some people say because you had the 1,000-year reign, and then a short time after that, the devil was allowed to have his time on earth. But in the past 100 years, the 19th, the 20th century, in a sense, you had World War I, World War II, and endless wars of a scale, and also the morality of this society. As people are selling farts. We're getting off topic here. Here we go. A treaty of peace was entered on the 3rd of September, 1783. On the 25th of November, the same year, the British troops evacuated the state of New York. After the United States had achieved their independence, it was early perceived in their confederation, which had been established for a particular purpose, lacked the cohesive force requisite of an effectual national government. Measures were accordingly instituted for the first revision of the Articles of Confederation, but finally the formation of the national constitution was determined on, and such a constitution was formed at the Convention of Philadelphia in 1787. After its adoption by the requisite number of states, it was ratified in convention in the state of New York by a close vote on the 26th of July, 1788, but with the recommendation of several amendments, which, however, were not adopted. So there were some amendments in the beginning on the Constitution after the war was won in 1787. There were some amendments that were not adopted. I wonder what amendment was that. We have the First Amendment, Second Amendment. Was there an amendment for Chocha? The difficulties arising out of conflicting claims of New York and New Hampshire to the territory of now comprising Vermont. Wow. So Vermont, New Hampshire, and New York were saying Vermont was theirs. Well, it is what it is. Which had been in partial abeyance during the Revolutionary struggle, were finally settled by the admission of the disputed territory into the Union as a state in 1790, named Vermont. So instead of giving that area to New York or New Hampshire, they made it its own state, Vermont. So, I mean, New Hampshire's kind of small. It makes sense. New York was greedy. New York wanted Vermont. By reasons the indefiniteness confusion of the original grants, Massachusetts claimed a portion of the territory of New York. This claim was settled by the cession to Massachusetts of all rights, exception that a political sovereignty over about one-fourth of the state. The largest tract of these lands embracing which have been known as the Genesee Country, and sold by the Massachusetts for the sum of $1 million. There you go. 1812, the British came back. It wasn't not even 20 years, about 20 years. 20 years later, pretty much, the British came back. Right? No, a little more than 20 years. 1787, 13 plus 12, 25 years. So 25 years at the end, they came back. It is what it was. Was what it was. Yeah. The British were pissed. Yeah. Yes. Wow. Hope you guys learned something. The first railroad in New York State was between Albany and Schenectady and was chartered in 1826 and completed in 5 years in 1831. Interesting. Wow. The history of Long Island. Well, is Long Island a state? No. Is it a real place? It's a real nickname. I'll read this for a little bit. There was a time, the time has long since gone, by a belief of the sudden creation of the earth in its present form was generally prevalent. Once it was considered not only heterodox, but almost blasphemous for a man to avow his conviction that he saw on the surface of the earth in indications of a change, that occurrence at a period previous to about 6,000 years since. That continents or even islands should rise from the sea, become submerged, and emerge again in the lapse of immense time was not deemed possible. Within the limits of historic time, no record was given, and more slight changes, and the men had not leaned to read the record in which the strata beneath the surface, which the science has made legible on the edges of the strata are visible. The man who ventured to assert Long Island was once submerged, and that emergence was comparatively of recent date, would have regarded some impious by others as mad. The, so they were debating if Long Island was even real back then. It wasn't there and it appeared. That period of ignorance has passed, and the people have come to recognize the fact as far as that the records of the past can be deciphered, and the earth has been steadily changing in the midst of changing environments, and that as far as science is able to peer into the future, changes will continue to succeed each other. The inspection of a map of Long Island shows it well on the coast that it has a berth by sea, in which geologically speaking may be teamed modern times, that the evidence of the vertical oscillation. People were smarter back then. People were really smart back then. That we don't know how to talk like this. I mean, people were really well educated, My goodness, the way they wrote. Wow, we don't even speak. The island extends from east to west about 120 miles and has an average width about 15 miles. Along the northern coast, the average elevation is about 100 feet and is found throughout their places where hills are much higher. On the coast, numerous necks of land and inlets or estuaries of the sound are seen, and the water in this shore is deeper than on the southern coast. Between the heights along the sound and shore regular range of hills which extend lengthwise, though the island near the middle, for the most in length, which are termed the backbone, the surface in many places much broken. Harbor Hill in the North Hempstead, one of the highest points in the island, was found by actual measurement to be 384 feet in height. Northern coast of the island is indented by 8 principal bays or fjords, which extend the island from 3 to 6 miles and have a width of from a half mile to a mile and a half. In some places, these water has a depth from 30 to 50 feet, and the average depth about 20 feet. Interesting. I mean, they figured this stuff out and they were riding horses. Okay, let's get to it. Before the settlement by the Dutch, when the dark ages of island history, the wampum or the wampum belts, giving no record of the red men's origin, migrations, wars, or loves. Immense heaps of broken shells along the Quahog or Periwinkle are their only monuments. Every locality where one or more families were located had a name which gave designation to the tribe. The authorities on this subject have recognized 13 tribes as follows: the Canarsie tribe, which now is Canarsie, Brooklyn, uh, Kings County in Jamaica. This included the Marichowicks of Brooklyn, the Nayaks and the Utrecht, and the Jamaicos of Jamaica. Their principal settlement was at a place called Canarsie, which is still a famous place for fishing and fowling. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see here. Wow. Interesting. Massapequa wasn't the original name. It was Marsapequa, Marsa, not Massapequa, but they changed the name. So now you know. If you live in Massapequa, it was Marsapequa. It is what it is. Okay. Colonial times. I find this stuff interesting. They bought Brooklyn for 151,000. Wow, things went up. Okay. Benson, Arthur Benson of Brooklyn for $151,000. Well, it is what it is. All right. All right. Everett's. I'm not going to bore you with this, but they got the prices of what things cost back then. Yeah, all right, maybe. Pork was 3 cents a pound. Guys, you could have got bacon for 3 cents a pound. Pork was 3 cents a pound. Beef, 2. Tallow, 6. Butter, 6. Dry hides, 4 cents a pound. Green hides, 2 cents a pound. Winter wheat, 4 cents a pound. But they're calling it pence, but it is what it is. Wow. 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 $3 for a horse. $2 to $3 for a horse. Horses that were 4 years or more, $12. Bulls or cows up to $6. Steers or heifers 1 to 2 years, $1. If they were 2 to 3 years, $2. If they were 3 to 4 years, $4. Goats 1 year, 8 cents. Goats were cheap. Fucking goats were cheap. Yo. Wow. Yeah. Oh, here's interesting. This is on Long Island while it was a colony. The things that the British Crown. This is some of their laws. This is why they revolted. But yet we have the same laws now. They fooled the people. Here we go. Under colonial government, nearly all marriages on Long Island were under the license of the governor, which the governor worked for the king. A practice which increased his income and added to the expense of entering the matrimonial state. So you had to pay to get laid either way, because a lady of the evening would cost you money, but if you wanted, I guess, to have a wife and children, you had to pay the governor for a marriage license. Marriage was by publication, and it was held in great disrepute. People were pissed. Many amusements, sports, well, they had sports back then. Many amusements, sports, and fireside enjoyments of the people were, as well as religious customs and superstitions, were transplanted from the native countries of the original settlers. The origins of many of these remote past is lost, but the customs often outlive the ideas. The annual return of Christmas and the Yule log and Christmas candles were burned amongst the English settlers like ancient times. Merry England and the Dutch celebrated the holidays with still greater zest in the manner of the forefathers of the Netherlands, Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus, Klaas. Santa Claus was spelt with a Klaas. Santa Claus was regarded amongst the Dutch children as a veritable personage, and they had a hymn in the Dutch language which they sang on occasion on their Christmas festivities. The first line was, Sanctus Claus goet heilig man. Santa Claus is a holy man. The practice of which introduced these Dutch settlers have the children's stockings hung up to be filled by Santa Claus, in far being extinct. New Year's Eve and the 1st of January formally celebrated by noisy way of firing guns at the door. New Year's Eve, this is in the 1700s. New Year's Eve, on the 1st of January, they would fire their guns at the doors in a neighborhood, and when the neighbors thus saluted, were expected to invite their friends in to partake for refreshments. Bro, if your neighbor shot your house up, they used to then reward them by making them drink and eat. But they didn't get mad. Okay. So they'd fire their guns at doors of the neighbors. When the neighbors, thus saluted, were expected to invite their friends and partake of refreshments, and then join them, thus to salute the others. And all the men were collected together. And when they repaired to a rendezvous and passed the day in athletic sports and target firing, it was finally deemed necessary to arrest by legal enactments this practice of firing guns. When the style was changed, the Dutch here at first refused to recognize the change of this celebration of festivities. The New Year was never celebrated with greater cordiality and hospitality by these people, and their old customs are plainly traceable in the manner of keeping that day still vogue here. Yeah, people shoot off fireworks on New Year's Eve, but that came from people shooting muskets at their neighbor's door and then drinking their scotch. Um, St. Valentine's Day, called on early Dutch, was Vrouwdag, or Woman's Day, was a time of great hilarity amongst the young people. One peculiarity in their manner of celebrating is thus described for men. Every girl provided herself with a cord around a knot at the end, and in the morning of this day they would sally forth, and every lad who they met was sure to have 3 or 4 smart strokes of the cord bestowed upon his shoulders. These were presumed were in the days of considered love taps. That's where the word love taps. The girls would have a cord tied around them and they would smack the boys. And in the light answered all the purposes of Valentine's Day, modern times. Easter, or Posh, pronounced Pas, was observed by religious services as well as merrymakings and continued Easter week. Among their customs was of making presents to each other in colored eggs, called Easter eggs, and this still prevails. Interesting. Yeah. Wow. 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 They had lotteries back then. Long Island and the files of old newspapers abound with notices of races that were to take place and accounts of those that occurred. Lotteries, too, were not only tolerated but often instituted to raise money for erecting churches or funding religious or benevolent associations. The churches were controlling lotteries back then. The latter form of gambling is now prohibited by law, but whether or not the moral sense of the people will ever frown down the former is unsolved question. Wow. Wow. Interesting. Wow. Interesting. Well, maybe I'll read a little more and then we'll go. Let me see here. This is interesting. The beginning of the revolution now, because now before was a generic over of the revolution, and now they tie into how Long Island was tied into the American Revolution. We have mentioned the fact that Long Island, the first to protest against taxation without representation, was made. It was in 1691. that the first permanent assembly of representatives of the people was established, and this was the first step in the direction of the free government of the colony of New York. The colonial governors have possessed a very large, almost absolute power, and the power sometimes been arbitrarily exercised. They're abusing their power. The people's money had been used for discretion of the governors, and it was believed had often been misapplied and embezzled. Now, our current governments have been doing the same thing. Whoever has the power does the fucking. The people's money had been used to discretion. On application 1706, Queen Anne, the Assembly, authorized to appoint a treasurer to receive and distribute all money which was raised under authority, and it's accordingly assumed general control of all finances, making specific appropriations. Blah, 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 blah. Everyone was stealing from everyone. Nothing's new. Yeah, nothing's new. Yeah. Wow. Hmm. Well, the English, this is during the Revolutionary War, all the people that tried to escape that were fighting against the king, I guess that they didn't want to get captured, it says all their property was destroyed by the crown. Churches and places of religious worship were desecrated for any objects which suited the worship convenience of the army, except for the Episcopalian, which it seems scrupulously regarded, doubtless in pursuance of the government instructions, their members upon Long Island being general in. So basically, the English crown just wiped out all the churches except the Episcopalian church, which I guess was loyal to the crown or liked by the crown. Yeah. When the British Army invaded Long Island in 1776, many persons who belonged to the island and had joined the British forces on Staten Island with the invading army. These royalists, they were Americans that were loyal to the crown, called royalists, were ordered to wear red rags on their hats, badges of friendship, to distinguish them from the rebels. The red rag proceeded with the army in every direction, giving information against every person who they disliked or causing, just like during the scamdemic. You got your card? Did you take your shot? You're going to get fired. Where's your red rag? Where's your red rag? Right? Here you go. They were ordered to wear red rags. Shortly after the army landed, General Howard ordered that every inhabitant who desired favor from the British Crown to attend headquarters and receive a certificate of protection. So as long as you bought a permit, your house was protected by the king. Many obeyed as friends, and some did it out of fear, but the great number remained at home. Everyone attended at the headquarters was ordered to mount a red rag on his hat. When the persons who remained at home found out that there was a magic in the red rag, they all mounted the red rag badge. I'm not going to say this word. Old and young wore red rags. These badges were submission soon produced scarcity in the needful article. So red rags were worth a lot of money back then. Mm-hmm. 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 Most parts of the island, particularly along the Sound, suffered greatly from depredations of little bands of piratical. I never heard that word. Piratical. These are pirates that were radical. Piratical plunderers. You are a piratical plunderer. Use that next time. Designated whaleboatmen, from the fact that their craft resembling those using whaling along the shore. With these, they would make frequent descents under the cover of night and attack detached houses, take all their stuff. It said rifle their inhabitants, but they're taking their shit, taking their valuables, availing themselves of speed in their vessels, reaching and lurking places among the island and the Sound. So, wow. Wow, they were having a grand old time. Yeah. Wow. 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 I know Sacco. Did you know that? Did you know that? Yeah, wow. Bro, they weren't fucking around back then. Look at this. By noon, 15th. You can't. This is 1776. 15,000 men and 40 pieces of artillery, heavy cannons, were landed at Fort Hamilton, which is in Brooklyn. Bro. Bro. Wow. Wow. There you go. I can't even get 5 people to hang out in the lounge. They had 15,000 people to invade Brooklyn with a ship and horses. Yo. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, it says there was a lot of smuggling going on there, too. I think we're going to carry on the next one. I've been doing this for about an hour. We're going to pick up where we left off into smuggling and prison ships in Long Island in the Revolutionary War. Yeah. Wow. Wow. We'll get into this next. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you around. It's information. You got to find out a lot of stuff tonight that you've never heard before or never will hear out there. So I hope you enjoyed it. Sako, hope you're staying fresh. Gentlemen, quality soaps.